Okay, good afternoon. We are here today for our third interview with Professor Dirk Bergemann from Yale University. The interview is the list of our interviews. The title is Free Thoughts on the Future. And so today we start with this interview. Now I start with the first question. The first question is about the net zero emission. Do you think it is possible to pursue the net zero emission target by 2050?
Well, thank you, Sergio, for having me here, and I hope we'll have a good conversation. When you think about the net zero emission target, we clearly think of this as a global target, and so I think it is possible, but it is going to be a huge challenge because the capacity of individual countries to achieve that net zero target is, of course, very, very different and may face larger problems in some countries than in other. Having said that, net zero emission is a target, and much of the target can be achieved by a few countries who are currently the largest emitters. And so by focusing on that, I think, and by focusing on these groups and their abilities and their capacities, I think we have the ability to come very close to net zero indeed.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. The second question is, which might be the main obstacles preventing the achievement of a target? What kind of obstacles do you consider predominant? For example, technological, behaviors, political, or governmental barriers?
They all, of course, come into play, but I would think that the main obstacles are coming from the economics and therefore then from the political aspects of the process of achieving net zero emission. If you think about what it will mean certainly a gigantic shift in the way we produce energy, from a few large emitters, mostly on fossil fuels, to a much more decentralized and ecologically sound sources of energy production. That will mean that we're going to take away a lot of revenue, a lot of current infrastructure from the established producers and giving it to, or at least moving it towards other sources of energy production. That means that these firms or these countries that benefit from fossil fuels will see a dramatic change in the sources of the revenues. And so even in the best of worlds, it will mean that many prices and many production plants will have to change dramatically. So there are certainly the economic problems. If you now overlay that with the implication that has for the political structure, it means at the end of the day, I think that we will have to raise the price of energy, and in particular, raise the price of energy that is generated from fossil fuel. So that is something that many producers, but also consumers, will view skeptically, and where there will be protest. Think about the protest in France by the Yellow Jackets that basically amalgamated a rather, perhaps diffuse protest and discomfort with the way current development was going, together with an increase in energy costs for rural or non-urban environments. Then all of a sudden we saw a very diffuse kind of protest focusing on two elements that clearly slowed down a lot of reforms in France. And we should expect to see similar obstacles arise in other areas. I said in the best of worlds in terms of political, because what we are seeing currently with the war in the Ukraine is, of course, a whole different set of political complexity. Think about the trades that are being made currently for Russian oil by China and India. These clearly show I wouldn't yet say extremes, but this shows the way trades are being made at at the neglect and at the expense of human lives. And so you could just imagine how difficult it will be to bring these different global players. And these are, now we're talking about the US, Russia, China, India. These are eventually going to be next to the European Union, the main targets of a sustained energy policy. So I think we see with this as an example the scale of the problems that we are facing if we're going to go to net zero emission in 2050.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Now we are moving again on future, but the idea is now to give you to give us a wider idea about this. So the third question is, where do you see the world in 10 years in terms of energy ecological transition?
That's probably the area where I am most optimistic, in the sense that what are the obstacles? Are they technological, behavioral, societal? Here, I think that we have, enormous potential to relatively quickly change the condition on the grounds if we allow society's initiative, the entrepreneurial spirit, to basically develop and help us with the transition. One of the wonderful advantages of various sources of recyclable energy is that, of course, typically these will be smaller projects. These will be decentralized projects. So individual countries, individual regions, individual governments, individuals can all contribute if they're provided with the right infrastructures, the right laws, the right support to enable them. So in terms of the speed at which the transition can happen, I'm actually rather optimistic in terms of potential that we have. But whether we reach that will, of course, depend on the ability of societies and their parliaments and their representatives to provide enough of a supportive infrastructure that will allow individual initiative to really flourish and being supported, so that they can connect, say, to the networks, that the energy transmission infrastructure supports the flow of smaller scale production into a large national grid. But if you think about Africa, if you think about South America, these are all areas where we have huge potential for solar energy. We have huge potential for very decentralized production of energy. So I would think that makes me optimistic in terms of our ability to achieve progress relatively fast, and perhaps faster than we can imagine.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Now we are going to the very long run. So looking to the more distant future, do you think we'll ever live in a world where only machines, robots will work, all artificial intelligence? So what about humans?
That is a very far prospect to think about. There are many things that we need to be concerned with when we think about artificial intelligence and when we think about machine robots. But I think that is really in the very far future, and it will require creative and really productive input from humans for a very, very long time. So I don't think we will make ourselves redundant or obsolete anytime soon at all. I think one concern that one may raise, and that we are facing, I think, in the transition to net zero as well, is that many of these technologies have, or in the moment seem at least to have, a natural tendency to concentrate, to coagulate around a few big providers. So if you think about, who manages the cloud in terms of the computing powers, in the moment we have in the West maybe 3 dominant providers, maybe 4 large providers that really define the infrastructure for cloud computing, which is going to be very central. If we think about sort of key technologies, key software insights to drive artificial intelligence, then in the moment, they also seem to rely on very large database that can be accumulated and managed by only or in the moment at least, are provided only by very few providers. And so that would suggest that the same concerns that we maybe had with energy provision and the creation of monopolies, say in oil and Standard Oil in the beginning of the 20th century for the US, are issues that we may have to face again. That is really what is our ability to decentralize and to spread the benefits of these technologies, not within a few companies, but spread it widely so that we can all use it. Now, to some extent, that danger is a little, perhaps a little bit overblown in the sense that also these large databases are relying on the input of a lot of individuals in order to get good search results. You really want to have a lot of individuals using your search algorithm. So that would say naturally, even very large companies need the participation of a large number of individuals. So that sort of balances a little bit a tendency to monopoly or to a restrictive monopoly. But I think these are concerns that we should have. And the less control, I would think, society and individuals have about the deployment and development of these technologies, the more concerns we should have, of course, in terms of what their future use and purposes will be.
Okay, thank you very much. I have some other question if you want to discuss a little bit with me. So I have some ideas. So the one is related to what you said at the end. So related to the digitalization and technological improvement and so on. What about the information? So could be a danger, could be a reduction of freedom. Is related to one thing I'm thinking about. My question is a little bit complex. I try to explain to you. A couple of, I think 1 month ago, probably, I'm looking to Marta because we were in Padua. Where was Joseph Stiglitz speaking about freedom. Okay. One of the questions that I had in mind was about if this huge quantity of finance system. So the finance system is huge. The size of the finance system is very, very high, very big. So I'm not sure that having this is able to stabilize the economy on the one hand. The other question is if it's able to increase the freedom in terms of, information, probably. I don't know. And something related to this. I would like to know your opinion on this.
Yes. And your first concern with the financial system, that is something that I didn't miss a little bit.
Yeah. So two questions. Okay. The first is digitalization and information.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So which could be the role of information related to digitalization? Because if we are looking, if we are increasing a lot technology, we are increasing also digitalization means also the control of information, and this is strongly related to freedom and cost. Of this. Second point is twofold. So the first is a macroeconomic point of view. So the size of a financial system is so big that probably is not able to stabilize the system. So the money supply today is so high that is able, in this moment, is able to maintain the system to a certain level. But if we are increasing a little bit the interest rate, this could affect the economic system in order to reduce the growth rate, as is dangerous. According to my opinion, it's so dangerous because the wave of financial system is so big, and every time there is a crisis, we start to increase the money supply, and this increase the quantity of money in the system, and this increase also this kind of wave. Okay. The third element, the second element related to financial system, probably I don't know, because I'm totally so is a field in which I'm not familiar with. But the link between, again, finance and information, maybe there is a strong link, because in this case, digitalization, I know which are the money that are in your, I don't know, in your bank. I control also. There is also the blockchain system that is related to all of these elements. I don't know if clear my question, but more or less this is what I have in mind.
Good. So let me maybe think first about digital information, privacy and freedom. I think this is going to be a defining issue for public policy for a very long time, and one that I think in particular democracies have to be very worried and very concerned about, in the sense that clearly centralized digital information has the ability to impose incredible levels of control on the population, and can be used to suppress, political opinion, political dissent very heavily. So as we look, say, into China, and perhaps to a lesser extent into Russia, we clearly see that perhaps a hopeful view was that information will always become an instrument of decentralization and democratization. And therefore, more information will always lead to a more democratic society. I think that was a view that was very prominent, say in the 80s, 90s, even the 2000s. And I think with the developments that we observe in China, we find that that's not necessarily right. That is, we see in the moment a stronger suppression of individual freedoms and liberties, and enabled and supported by the collection of digital information of all of its citizens. So in terms of a personal profile, a social profile, that is very powerful in terms of steering the abilities of individuals to, as they claim, make pro-social decisions, but restricting or enabling individuals to do more or less in society. So I think, in particular, democratic societies need to be concerned how quickly the use of information can be turned from enabling more choices, enabling more informed decisions, to a more autocratic and a more suppressive regime. On the other hand, I think we would be amiss if we don't recognize and publicly pursue the ability that comes with the collection of information and data for the benefit of society. So, if we think, I think the entire area of medical and public health domain is an area where we clearly noticed that it would be very valuable to gather a lot of information. It would be very valuable to make this information widely available to researchers for in the pursuit of development of new treatments, in the broadening of treatments, in development of new pharmaceutical products. In the moment, I think the US is a very good example for a very highly decentralized, very privatized delivery of health products. That creates a lot of frictions in terms of how we can bring data together in order to make more informed choices. I think if we think about one of the failures of sort of the digital economy, I would think how we dealt with the COVID crisis is certainly one, because a lot of instruments that we had in order to trace infections, spread, transmission, actually were never being put at effective use. And that's partly because of course concerns for privacy. So I think this is a very good example that shows us that we need to develop very strong policies, very strong points of view that both guarantee individuals privacy, but enable public interest, public society to to bring together the benefits of digital information and help us address solving many problems. We talked early on about the role of private data providers, private cloud provider services. The public has enormous databases. The state has enormous databases. Think about the data that is in the public health system. If we were to able to really marshal these resources and bring them forward and enable the public system to inform and guide us in our decision, I think we would see a big leap in our ability to treat the population and come up with more advanced. So I think this is a good example where we see we will not, be able to succeed if you are going to interdict all forms of the gathering of data. But we should always be concerned about privacy, both because we need the trust of the population in order to bring the new instruments into the category, and also because the concern we have for democracy that all of this information can be turned very quickly if we don't have the right safeguards in place by a less democratic-minded government. Speaking from the US, this is of course a very recent experience that is still very present in our minds. For the role that the financial system and information has, so I must say that I feel a little bit less secure to speak about the monetary system. I think the one thing to point out is that if we now look positively at China, in the sense how they are the main provider of digital services, Alibaba, Tencent, and JD, have basically used the data that they're collecting from individual purchases, individual household decisions to enable new forms of financial services, new forms of credit. Then I think this is another instance where we see that there's huge progress can be achieved by bringing this information into play and by using it to make credit decisions, because many credit constraints and maybe people who have not yet have a long history have a very hard time entering the financial system. This digital information help them to enter the financial system much quicker and they achieve a better status much quicker than before. And so I think there's also big potential, but of course one that should be guarded. If you look at the US or similarly in Germany, which I know, individual credit information is basically provided by one, in case of Germany, a monopoly, or in the US, essentially by an oligopoly of credit rating agencies that have a very, almost archaic or old-fashioned view of how they use the data that clearly is not enabling a widespread adaptation of financial services to much more fine-grained data. And so I think there, the potential for the interaction of finance and data is huge, but we need to have the right framework. Perhaps the shocking thing is, if you think about the US, all of these digital services that we are now benefiting from, but also in terms of Facebook, Google, and Amazon, have been now in existence for 25, 30 years. Yet we have not yet had at a federal level any legislation that would address the many new challenges that come with this. So So this just shows you that politics necessarily lacks sort of entrepreneurial and individual efforts. We should expect that, but we don't want that lag to become too big, because otherwise we're moving in a direction that society has not deliberated and has not acted upon. And so I think that is the main concern. Blockchain is another one. The size of the financial system has grown to such an extent that we might have worry whether we will ever get it back to a to a size that we can regulate, or that we can think about systematically what are the principles that should guide our view on blockchains. And so the current financial crisis that we undergo may be, of course, a change, because it sort of downsizes these financial system a little bit and makes them a little bit more fragile, that it may be in their best interest now to in fact submit to a government, to a framework, to conceptual framework in which they can operate. But this is still to be decided, and it's still an open question. So
okay, thank you very much. But do you think that the blockchain system could work in the future, or
say it again?
This kind of new money systems, depending on blockchain, so this could work in the future, or we need a central bank behind in order to control, to guarantee the value. So there is this hidden value inside this new system that depends on the mining process in order to create this algorithm, in order to define. The question is, there is a value. The value in some cases is able also to buy something. So Elon Musk used also this in order to, at the beginning, was a launch of probably advertisement or something in order to create an effect on the market. I don't know exactly what is the move of Musk, but probably. So at a certain point, he said that it was possible to pay, I think, share of his company by using, money, this kind of virtual money. Okay, that depends on blockchain. And the question, looking at the future, my thought is looking at the future. I'm not sure. So I understand that behind there is the central bank, that in this moment is a need. So this creates this totally difference with respect to a system that is virtual, another one that is still virtual but has a building behind. So there are people. But hidden, there is a value. Someone is able to say that in this kind of virtual money, there is a value in order to exchange. I'm looking again to the future. If it's possible to have a future defined by this kind of methodology, this kind of algorithm or not. I don't know if this is clear, the question, but is...
Well, the question is easy to answer if you think about the future, the next minute or the next year. Clearly, they already play an important role. And so is there a future in which there will be cryptocurrency and which there will be blockchains? I certainly think there is. In many ways, it's an incredible sort of confluence and innovative elements to basically create a completely decentralized currency that doesn't rely on a state entity or a large private entity, right? So think about individual currencies or individual private currencies were introduced in the US in the 17th, 18th century by banks, and the same way in Europe, important trading houses basically had their own currency for a while, and that was very important to generate and support international trade. So that happened already. The innovation of blockchains and currencies, cryptocurrencies, is that can happen completely decentralized, without a big trading house, without sort of a monopoly in some sense behind it, but simply from the wisdom sometimes, and sometimes also the foolishness of the crowds to create a system of exchange that they bet on, that allows them to operate outside of state-owned entities or monopoly-owned entities, and that in particular allows the population in countries that impose strong controls on economic actions by individuals to basically shift their currency. Think about Iran, think about China, think about Russia. So to some extent, it's an incredible innovation. At the same time, it allows all kinds of trades that we think are socially not valuable and often are, with the sole purpose of tax evading, of hiding, of whitewashing money that comes from criminal activity. So I think, so that's why it's important to think about the right framework. Clearly, in the moment, a lot of the central banks are thinking about digital currency, so it's something that they recognize will probably play an important role in the future way of defining monetary transactions in the monetary system. And as a society, these blockchains have also a lot of properties that we should be very worried about in terms of the rise of bubbles, the rise of speculation, the inability to coordinate transactions. So, a transaction is always somebody who, the two-sidedness of transaction is guaranteed by the central bank. It is not guaranteed by anyone on the blockchains and cryptocurrency. So there are a lot of risks, and these are all sort of externalities, just as we talked initially about environmental externalities, emission externalities. These are now financial externalities that we want to get the good understanding first, and then to get a hold on to make sure that the worst effects are attenuated, limited, or do not even arise. So I certainly have concerns, but it's a document of, I would say, the inventiveness of humans and the creativity that we're basically being confronted with new issues that we as society have to address. So you take this challenge as a positive aspect of what we're able to, and then we just need to find sort of the right bed, the right riverbed for these ideas to flow, and for that society and the public needs to set the defining features.
Okay. Thank you, Dirk. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you. It's an honor.